Welcome and thank you for coming to Copyright and Compliance. My name's Naomi Stallard. I'm from the department. I look after the intellectual property and copyright. And we're here today to try to break down this very scary copyright subject that people don't like to deal with. Start with a little disclaimer and copyright notice, of course. We have to start with that. Basically, this isn't a legal information. Just to let you know, it is advice. If you do need legal information, then we strongly recommend you do actually get that. Also, this particular resource we've made available under Creative Commons, which means you're free to reuse it as long as you attribute. This also, though, there are excluded material under that license, which means although you can use this whole presentation as a whole, you're not free to take the government logo, and that's not under Creative Commons. So there are some exclusions, including other material from third parties. Okay, just with the outline, just going over what we'll be doing today. We're doing a little bit of an overview of copyright for those of you that aren't maybe so familiar with copyright, and third-party content, looking at determining copyright status. How do you determine that? Your options, where to find content, all about attribution, and then using videos and music. There will be a question time, and do feel free to ask questions throughout the session. Okay, just a little bit of an overview. Before I start that, can I just ask please where people are from, if that's okay? Yeah.
I'm from Polytechnic West.
Okay, fantastic.
West Coast.
West Coast, yes.
Real Estate Institute.
Real Estate Institute. And what about our online people? We've got some.
Online, HRN,
Okay, fantastic. All right. So just getting an idea of where you're from and I guess the sort of information you might be pursuing. Who here has done any of the copyright courses or are familiar to some degree with copyright? No? Okay. All right. So basically, going over copyright, it's basically intellectual property, or IP as we call it, basically refers to the creations of the mind. It's a general legal term, and copyright is one of those areas that comes under intellectual property, and we can use those terms interchangeably. So that includes copyright, trademarks, patents, plant breeders' rights, even industrial designs. So copyright protects the original expression of the idea, and what that means is putting something into material form. So you can have an idea, you can, you can think about things all you like, you can talk about things all you like, but until it's recorded in some way, it's not actually going to be protected by copyright. In Australia, basically copyright is protected for around 70 years. I know I'm jumping here, roughly 70 years. There are some exceptions for anything created before 1955. So there are some exceptions, and that's, if you need more information about those few exceptions, do look up that particular little info sheet there. What I will also say is copyright is protected under the 1968 Copyright Act, and that is free and automatic in Australia. It's not the case in all countries, but it is free. So basically you put it down and it's protected, recorded in some way. When we talk about third-party copyright, we're talking about any sort of content that's been created with some effort, of course, and skill, and it's been created by someone else. So in summary, I guess, around that sort of the copyright aspect, the copyright owner has the exclusive rights. So we're talking about rights here. It has the exclusive rights to reproduce, communicate, perform, and reallocate those rights and license those rights to others, essentially. And the point of copyright, I guess, is so that it means that creative people can earn an income from creative works, and that there is actually an incentive to create new works. So we've got all the boring stuff out of the way, we've got the basics. Okay, so we go down the path and we've found some really great third-party content. What area, sorry, do you teach in?
I'm the learning advisor actually. So
Okay, right.
Mentoring stuff and putting information online. So
Okay.
you need to be very mindful of
Yes.
copyright applications.
Okay, so you've found a great image, or you want to use a screen capture of some description for telling the lecturers about what they can and can't do. The first thing you need to think about is, will my use be substantial or recognisable? Is it copyright protected? And then you've got to think about what is the copyright status of the content. Substantial is a little bit misleading in the copyright world. It doesn't necessarily mean a large part within the Copyright Act. So what we're really talking about here is if it's an integral part, a recognisable, important or essential part, then it can be considered substantial. It can be a fairly small quote. So I've just got a quote down here from Animal Farm. The creatures outside looked from pig to man and from man to pig and from pig to man again, but already it was impossible to say which was which. Would anyone, this is 113 pages, this book, would anyone like to hazard a guess as to whether it's substantial? This is the last quote, it's last famous quote of the book. So I've got quite a few nods there. Yeah, I'd say it's fairly likely, and it's extremely likely that it's substantial, even though it's essentially a couple of lines out of a 113-page book. So yeah, I guess it's sort of looking at qualitative rather than quantitative. There are some really good sort of popular examples. For instance, those of you who remember the Men at Work hit Down Under with that famous flute riff, and that flute riff was found to, in a not so long ago court case, found to be from Kookaburra Sits on the Old Gum Tree, a line from that. And that was held to be substantial because Kookaburra, the song is actually it's a short song, and it was considered to be a substantial part of that particular, and a fairly important part of that particular song. And that tiny flute riff, they're now having to pay royalties. So another case many, many years ago was that in a poem by Kipling, the poem If, there were 4 lines in a 32-line poem, and the 4 lines were held were reproduced and were held to be infringing of copyright. So it can vary, but yeah, it's about, in a lot of cases, it can be both the amount and it can be about what's actually in terms of quality of the work and how important it is. Then we go, okay, so we've found this great thing online, we've found this great image, perhaps, or we've found this great piece of text. We've determined that it's copyright, it's covered by copyright. So what I didn't quite mention back there was that single words and slogans and catchphrases are generally not copyright protected. So a newspaper headline is not considered enough of a copyright work to actually be protected by copyright. And there are other ways of protecting that, and you can go through the whole trademarking, as you can see, Paris Hilton's phrase there, and some really crazy phrases that have been trademarked down the track. So you've determined that it's either trademarked or it's a larger phrase or it's an image, so it's copyright protected. How do you find, and this is the problem, you get onto the website, you get onto Google Images or whatever, and how do you find that? Well, you try to trace the image back. So the logical sort of place is websites. You go to the bottom of the website, you break it down, you look at copyright, terms of use. For the online documents, you try if it's available, and these things aren't always available, and you look at the imprint page footer. You check out whether it says copyright, you see if there are any licenses there, and the same with hard copy and imprint. And let's just go to some examples. Okay, can someone tell me, I don't know how well you can see that down there, can someone tell me how, where they think maybe the copyright statement might be? We've got down here disclaimer, privacy, complaints, sitemap, www.wa.gov. Where do you think the copyright statement might be? Well, there's this all contents copyright there, but for further information, if you want any more information about who to contact, or it's not obvious, is it? So you've got that general statement, but then you've come down to actually hitting disclaimer, not the most obvious way and not the greatest naming. There are some disclaimers, and then down the very bottom here, you've got copyright. And it mentions the trademarks here as well. And it also mentions that some of the images used are used from a photo library, so Shutterstock. And that, if you're looking at a particular image on our website, then that's the information you're going to need. Here's a little online learning module, with a free one that we've designed for RTOs and for state training providers. Just to open that for you. This has got a lot of resources, and you are free to use this. The link will be sent out with this resource. But down the bottom here, this is a little better set out. If you can see it, you can actually see that there's a little bit more information at the bottom of the website. And it also includes the Creative Commons license. So if I wanted to, do you know if I'd be able to use anything from this site? What do you think? With this information, there's a Creative Commons BY attribute and share alike license. Do you know anything about Creative Commons? You think, yeah. Yeah, okay. We'll get to Creative Commons, but absolutely you are able to use any of the content on this site, in this learning module, free of charge, as long as you attribute in the same way that we have. Okay, and last of all, hard copy. This is from our Copyright Doing It Right sample imprint page here. Probably very small. Can you see, if I wanted to copy something from this particular publication, could I do it? So basically, with the Copyright Peacock Institute of Technology, basically they're saying we own the copyright. No parts of this publication may be reproduced. So you're very limited in this case, and then the images have been taken from a photo library. Okay, so you've gone down this path. You found a really great image for your e-learning team, or for your marketing team, or for whoever, and you've worked out that it's copyright protected, it's big enough, it's an image. You've determined that it is copyright. There's no license, it's not free. There's no free for education license or anything written up there. What are your options? Well, you can provide your students with links only, and this is something that we're really trying to push, because it's a copyright-free activity. So you can provide those links, and the students go there themselves, or the lecturers go to that link themselves, and there's no problems. Some of you from the state training providers can rely on the statutory licenses. If you want to know more about that, I do provide a copyright for resource development. Statutory licenses only for schools, TAFE, state training providers and universities. You could rely on copyright exceptions. They're coming up in a sec. I'll explain that more if they apply. You could simply ask permission. There's the other big option. We'll get to that, more detail about that, and you can find alternatives, and I'll discuss that in a second. So as we just mentioned, the statutory licenses, I do a course just on copyright for resource development, just for the state training providers. We can't talk about those now because not everybody here or online is from a state training provider. If you do want to know more information, contact me, check out these links, and our Copyright Doing It Right online learning module that I showed you before has a whole section for state training providers. Just the special exceptions that I was talking about. So this isn't as strict, the section 28, the one up the top there. It's not as strict because it doesn't refer to, for instance, a state training provider or an institute such as a state. It doesn't apply directly to those sort of institutes. This can be for any kind of educational institution. So section 28 allows you to play videos, DVDs, music, CDs in class. You can basically show, for the purposes though, the big disclaimer, for the purposes of educational instruction within a class, you can show commercial DVDs, you can display material using an interactive whiteboard or an LMS, wiki, blog or intranet, all under section 28. You can stream videos from YouTube. Who here uses YouTube? Anyone? Yes. I think most people in their teaching uses YouTube. So you can link to websites to display content. You can stream DVDs in a CMS, but you cannot upload content into a CMS. You cannot download. So you can stream for YouTube, you can embed. The other big thing is you must use legal copies. So no Bali DVDs, no Bangkok DVDs. So 200 AB, this applies only to the institutes, schools, TAFEs, STPs and unis. This allows you to use the rare, very narrow occasions when you can actually upload or possibly upload and format shift if need be. So you've got a VHS in your library. This will generally be done by library staff, and you will need to go through your library sort of copyright representative. And you've got a VHS, you want to put it into a digital format, because who has video players anymore? Okay, so if you want to know more about that, do look up this particular website on the screen or contact me. Again, we run a copyright for resource development for STPs that deals with that. Fair dealing is something that you probably won't have a lot to do with. This generally applies to students. So it's important just to be aware that students can make copies of content, and they can do that under fair dealing. You're allowed to use content, a certain amount of content, around 10% roughly, for research purposes, study purposes. There's also criticism, review, parody, satire. There's also reporting the news, a whole bunch of sort of other little things like advice for a lawyer, but the use has to be fair. It has to be limited. It has to be taken down immediately. So students can show something, for instance, in a class, but not then put it up as a poster for the general public. That's sort of how it works. So this doesn't apply to lecturers, but it is important to know that this applies to students. Who here has asked permission? Yes. How was that? Worked well. Oh, fantastic. So it can work sometimes. It may not work other times. It's always good to allow a bit of time. Sometimes having worked for publishers, it can take a very long time. Sometimes they don't answer at all, as we know at the Old West one. We ask and there are new companies that have bought them out, and you just can't find the copyright owner. So the other big thing is to keep records, of course, of anything that you do get permission for, because down the track you may leave, someone else picks up this fantastic training resource you created, but nobody knows anything about where these images have come from, or whether you've got permission, or if there are conditions that you can only use them for a certain period of time. So that's really important. Straight training providers have to keep records legally anyway for survey purposes, but everybody else has, I would recommend as best practice, certainly keeping records of that. Okay, finding alternative content. This is where we get to the Creative Commons. So you've used Creative Commons, you've not used Creative Commons. Have any of our online people used Creative Commons? Have a smiley face, thumbs up, thumbs down. No? Okay. That's okay. So Creative Commons is an international non-profit organisation that provides licences around the world for copyright owners to pretty much use their content in whichever way the copyright owners determine. So there's a series of licenses for Baseline. They mix and match them. This licence that I've made this available under is BYNC, which means attribute and non-commercial. So you've got to attribute. That's all of the licenses, and this is available to anyone for non-commercial purposes. They can reuse it. So there are lots of organisations that use and rely on Creative Commons. I'd recommend checking out CC Search, and it's a filter. It's not a search engine. It's a filter. It filters for you sites like Flickr, Freesound, Wikimedia Commons. Oh gosh, there's so many different ones there. It's worth checking it out. Flickr's the photo library. Freesound's got the the sound bites for podcasts and vodcasts. Wikimedia Commons has got some really great information. The other one I'd recommend is Open Education Material. Has anyone encountered that before? There's so much out there. This is a site that's got a lot of Creative Commons content, and some where it says read the fine print, which you won't be able to use unless you are at an STP or a school or university. But there is still a lot of content there which has such subjects from people from all over the world, some of them very obscure, some of them rubbish, some of them very good. Something that is bandied around a bit and not always understood, public domain. Public domain, I guess, generally means that it's out of copyright or someone has placed it deliberately in the public domain. So I guess it's sort of like William Shakespeare is an example, Newtonian physics. If you go to the CC search, Pixabay uses public domain and some great photos. It's like a photo library. They subsidise it through advertising Shutterstock images, which you do pay for. So anything with Shutterstock on it, don't use unless you want to pay. And Pixabay's got a whole lot of creative, basically public domain content. Open clip art. Who likes to use clip art here? It's handy sometimes. Microsoft has now, in their later programs, have started removing their clip art. So they just direct you to Bing now, I believe, which is not always, that content is not actually always, you're not allowed to use that necessarily in a classroom, in a public setting. So if you like clip art, there's a few other CP, anyway, there's a whole range of them that if you go to CC search, you'll find those for clip art. Project Gutenberg, that's where I got that quote from, that Animal Farm, and they've got a whole lot of novels and like Animal Farm and George Orwell content, Gone with the Wind, stuff that's out of copyright and is available now as whole books. Flexible learning toolboxes, anyone used any of those? Sometimes free, sometimes for a cost, that's another alternative. And the other big one is create your own original materials. Sometimes, if you need a photo or image of someone hitting a hammer, then it's easier just to do it yourself. Or someone using a power tool or anything really, it is easier to do it yourself. Do make sure you've got permission from the people, especially if you can see the face, and some kind of talent release. Then your organisation owns the copyright to that and you can do what you like with it. But do keep records, especially if you're a state training provider, keep records that it is your content, because otherwise in a survey you would end up paying for that if they can't find out who it actually belongs to. For everyone else, it's well, good practice obviously to have a sort of maybe a list of your images so that you know what you're using down the track. Okay, if there's one thing you get out of this today is attribute. It's a legal requirement to acknowledge any third-party material use unless there's something to say otherwise, unless you've got an agreement to say otherwise. What I will say is keep it simple, really. It should be nearby, it should be legible, it should be easy to locate the source, it should follow your referencing style if you have one. And if you've got permission or there's a license like Creative Commons, then you need to do what you need to do. Like if they've stipulated, you've got permission and they've said, oh, we need you to use this attribution, then you need to include it. For Creative Commons, you need to include, well, we'll get to that, Creative Commons, but there's a set sort of a list of little things that you need. Okay, so you've gone down the track, you've found an image, you've ascertained that it's copyright, you've gone down the track of finding out that it's protected, you've asked permission, they've given you permission, they haven't actually said how they want it done, just use your basic line of reproduced by so-and-so with permission, and you could include a date. For Creative Commons material, again, as I said, there are certain things you need to conclude. For more information on exactly how to do some shortcuts with Creative Commons, because that's where people get unstuck, it can be a bit unwieldy. Try this particular link here, and it's a fact sheet on attribution. This is how, just as an example, how most people like to deal with copyright and how many of us have dealt with copyright for the last 10 years. And this is also an example of third-party content, which we've got permission to use through a photo library. So this is Shutterstock image. We've got permission to use the images. We tend to put an attribution by agreement at the very beginning of our resources in most cases, and then we don't have to put anything else throughout. So that's our agreement with them. So this is what we've sort of organised to say at the beginning of our resources, and that's what we do. And then for the rest of this resource, I wouldn't need to put anything else in, except to basically differentiate as to which resources are theirs and which aren't. So then I would actually attribute the other ones, anything that's not Shutterstock, if you get my meaning. Sorry to confuse. Okay, this is an example of an image I found on Flickr with the Creative Commons attribution. It can be as complicated or as simple as you want it to be. Certainly, if it's a hard copy document that you're giving out, you'll need to include the title of the image, who it's by. Sometimes it's just a single name, sometimes it's just it's a nonsensical name. You need to include the link, Flickr, and the license type. So it's 2.0 BY, which is Attribute, the 2.0 version. If it's just an online document that you're giving to students, then you don't need to include all of that. You don't even need to include that logo. You can just include the Flickr link, and you would say CCBY 2.0, and you could hyperlink that, or you could include that, the actual link to the image, and hyperlink that logo. And there are two different types of logos. There's the skinny one, which I like to use, and then there's the fatter one to draw more attention. So there are some really easy ways of making it smaller and not as complicated. And there are actually ways of even making it smaller again, certainly if you're using online content and it's within PowerPoint. So I'd check out that fact sheet for sure. This is the public domain content that I was talking about before. So this is from Pixabay, and it's quite professional looking. Some of the public domain stuff is a little bit rubbishy. You've got to admit it is a bit rubbishy. But yeah, Pixabay is a fantastic site. They do say in their terms and conditions, well, it'd be great if you could include a link. And for STPs, for state training provider schools and universities, I would recommend you should keep some kind of references within that presentation, even if it's at the end, as to where it's actually from, because down the track, if you're surveyed, then it can be problematic. And also it's good practice, it's best practice really to know, as I said before you leave, where did this document come from? Where did this image come from? So, and there is the public domain little symbol there, which you don't have to use as you please. In fact, I would normally just put in the image and the link, basically in brackets, in small underneath. Okay, jumping now to using videos and music. Who uses music? Anyone using music in their class? Anyone use YouTube? We've gone over that already. So it is becoming very popular. There are some little things that we do just need to be aware of. The terms of use, for iTunes especially, is personal and non-commercial use. How does that sit in the classroom? Nobody really knows. We advise not to go near it really, as in terms of sort of risk management. iTunes, we've not had any clarity on where people stand with that. YouTube, similarly, even though I guess we don't sign any terms and conditions when we're actually viewing a YouTube video, it could be that by just viewing it, you're actually agreeing to the terms and conditions. That's been a precedent over in Canada. That hasn't been proven over here yet. So it's a little bit difficult, that particular one. There can also be, the other issue is there can be multiple layers of copyright within a video. So say for a music video, you're looking at lyrics, images, sound, the music clip, music video clip, and so many layers there that could belong to different people. And also just something to watch out for is that videos can contain defamatory content, but I guess most people would be screening for that, you'd hope, in the classroom. So how do we get around that? Well, we try to avoid iTunes where possible, but links, we're back to the links. Using links or embedding for YouTube and using it under Section 28, if applicable, and most of you in educational institutions would be able to rely on that. That's using links is not a copyright activity at this stage, so that's a really good way around it. You could try looking for Creative Commons, CC, or freely licensed YouTube videos. Not a huge selection. There's more on Vimeo. You will have to filter for Creative Commons and openly licensed videos on Vimeo. You could also search for CC music. There is some available, and you can again go through the CC search. You'd be surprised what you can actually find. Obviously not the latest hits, not the top of the pops, but there's some great music available within that. The other thing is you've seen a really great YouTube video, and you really want to use it. You want to upload it because you're in a remote area, or you just want to upload it because you want to use it and stop and start or whatever, have control over your download. Ask permission is the other option. If you get an answer in time and if you can get through to them, ask permission. So that's the other option there. TeacherTube is the other one that we sometimes recommend looking into in terms of YouTube. There are some great free videos there that would be worth checking out. So I've galloped through at the speed of knots. Are there any questions? Are there any scenarios that you'd like to discuss? So we're just discussing ClickView and the benefits of using ClickView that the people from Polytechnic West have uploaded or downloaded, I guess, and uploaded a whole lot of content from broadcast shows that have been broadcast for their classes and been able to keep them in ClickView. Also some of the personal videos, and that's helped with saving space on another part on your server, I guess, in your learning management system. So that's been the benefit of ClickView, and that is I think you subscribe to that and you pay for that. The only downside to ClickView is that my understanding is that only institutes that have that subscribe to the Part 5A license, the screen rights license, are able to use that. I could be wrong. Maybe there's a different type of license that they may have for non-subscribers to that. But yes, certainly for schools, TAFEs, institutes, state training providers and universities, that is a great option for sure. Any other questions? Have you had any copyright dilemmas? Okay, so the question is about full fee paying versus and Part 5B of the class. My understanding for that is that we had clarified that it's about the actual resources. So if they're paying for the resources and it's making a profit, then that is actually then that content can't be used. Well, thank you very much for attending, and thanks for turning up, and thanks for attending today. Good luck, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions about copyright or intellectual property. Okay, thank you.
Authorised by the Government of Western Australia, Perth.